In a prior video, we've talked to you about what are objectives or strategic objectives in a negotiation and how they're used in combination with tactics to achieve your ultimate desired outcome or goals in a negotiation. Well, in this video, I want to talk to you about some strategic objectives that are oftentimes associated with negative outcomes. That is, you should, in most scenarios, attempt to avoid these in a negotiation. So the first one I want to bring up, very common, is the under-aspiring negotiator, commonly known as the winner's curse. And that arises when you undervalue your value proposition or your position in the negotiation. Okay, it's when you throw out for example, you anchor or open up in a negotiation at a certain point. You say, I will pay this amount or I will take this amount for an item you're purchasing, for example, if it's a negotiation over the price of an item. And the other side immediately accepts your offer. Your first thought is, well, I could have gotten more, or I could have paid less if I would have offered more or less, right? So that immediate thought process is winner's curse, right? Now, I've talked to you about in other videos that you generally should not open up or anchor first in a negotiation unless you have good or superior information to the other person, okay? Because you often fall into this context, right? Someone who wants to close a deal very quickly will oftentimes throw out something that they believe that is fair, but the other side will likely take. And then when it gets accepted that quickly, they fall into this tendency, this outcome, right, of feeling like they've under-aspired in the negotiation and they're not content with the negotiation. So once again, that tendency ultimately causes hard feelings in the negotiation, can interrupt the entire process. So that being said, it can be a negative outcome. Okay, over-aspiring. So that's the opposite, right, of under-aspiring. It's basically when you set things too high, right? Now, I've talked to you about before setting a target point in the negotiation, and you set it high. What you aspire to is your aspirational point, because generally you can't go higher than that in a negotiation. Wherever you anchor, you should anchor it whatever your best outcome you believe you could achieve. Now, it needs to be rational. It needs to be realistic, because oftentimes if you throw out something that is completely irrational, completely unrealistic, it will cause a negative effect on the other party. It can look like a procedural foul, right? It can run afoul of what they perceive as being the procedural interest at stake, or what is fair in the negotiation. Okay, so it can alienate them, cause them to leave the negotiation, or cause them to have some level of hard feelings or negative feelings that can ultimately affect how well you're able to proceed with or carry out the negotiation. So keep that in mind. Over-aspiring can be a negative as well. All right. The positional negotiator, and that's someone who basically puts down their position and says they're not budging, right? A negotiation generally is a give and take. I like to define a negotiation as a communication exercise, right? It is an exchange of information to ultimately lead to a settlement of a dispute, a conflict, or a perceived difference in position, okay? But someone who just lays down their position and refuses to move oftentimes can seem bullheaded, not willing to compromise or to work together with the other person. It can cause negative perceptions in the negotiation and can ultimately contribute to the negotiation itself failing. All right, or at least procedural inconsistencies or hard feelings in the negotiation. So you have to be very careful there as well. Grass is always greener negotiator, and the real term is a reactive devaluation, and it basically means that anytime you're in a negotiation, if someone else in the negotiation, the other party, throws out any offer, you automatically perceive that offer as being negative, right? Just because it came from that other person, right? Because you see them as an opponent, as someone you're competing with. So that's a common tendency with a more competitive type of negotiator. But you see it again as being devalued or not as valuable or against your interest, even if it's exactly what you're looking for, even if it's in your best interest, right? You see whatever they throw out as being a negative, and you go the other direction. In separate videos, we talk about what are compatible interests, right? Distributive interest or negotiations, integrative interest or negotiations, and compatible interest or negotiations. Now, a grass is always greener bias there will cause you to arrive at a subpar outcome even with compatible interests. Okay. Now, lastly, irrational escalations of commitment. Okay, that's basically oftentimes they say throwing good money after bad, irrationally escalating your commitment towards a position because that was the position you took up front. An unwillingness to adjust your position or your approach to something because you've already invested value in it. Related to it is the concept of sunk cost. Oftentimes that is what causes irrational escalation, not because you're so attached to your position, but you're attached to the idea of not losing the value that you perceive that would be lost if you took a different tact, right? So you double down on a position, on a course of action because you believe ultimately that could be successful and it will cause you not to lose what you've already put into it, where even a different approach might cause you to lose what you've put in it, but you've succeeded in the negotiation, right? So again, the irrational escalation. Now, a somewhat related concept is the idea that oftentimes if you receive some value or you possess some value, you will work harder not to lose that value than you will to acquire it in the first place. Okay, so if you've acquired something from a negotiation or you believe you're entitled to something or it's yours as part of a negotiation, you are so reluctant to lose that or forego any of what you believe is yours. You believe you have a greater entitlement to it than if you had not earned it yet, but it was potentially could be earned in the negotiation. So you'll work harder to maintain it than you will to achieve it to start with, and that's the endowment effect. So you can see how that can also give rise to an irrational escalation in a given position, even when it does not seem to make sense. So once again, these are all strategic objectives or tendencies, as you will, that will oftentimes lead to tactics that cause you to carry these out that are associated with a negative outcome in the negotiation and to the extent possible should be avoided.